What's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So today we are checking out Ravonna Renslayer, tonight's new card coming in at Series 4. Ravonna is a 3-cost, 3-power that reads ongoing. Your cards with 1 or less power cost 1 less, minimum 1. So, pretty neat card. First card coming into Series 4 for the Loki season. And below we can also see the Spotlight cash cards that are going to be available alongside her, which includes Jean Grey and Zabu. So let's talk a little bit about this card. Is she worth picking up? What kind of decks can we make use of her in? We'll take a look at it. Before we dive on into all of that though, I do want to mention the article, link in the description below, from Safety Blade. He cooked up some really neat decks for this card, and I liked his overall analysis on it. So if you want to grab the decks or just read up a little bit about the card or the decks themselves, definitely recommend checking out the article, link in the description. So Ravonna is a pretty neat card. I actually think this card would be being rated much higher if not for the impending release of Mobius in the following week, which looks like it might be putting a damper on a lot of the cost reduction stuff we are seeing in Marvel Snap. Cost reduction is always a powerful thing in any card game, especially so in Snap, and it'll be interesting to see if cards like this and other powerful cost reduction effects are able to persist through a card that really limits what they're trying to do. Now, since Ravonna is a Series 4 card, I think if you want to be picking this card up, tokens are the way to go. If you're really strapped on tokens, I probably wouldn't buy her, but if you have a decent pile stored up and you're interested in building around the effect, because this is very much a card that encourages build-arounds with specific decks, then I think she's actually a pretty reasonable card to go for. Or maybe if you want all of the cards here in this week with Jean Grey and Zabu. But generally, I don't think this is the best of the Spotlight weeks to go for, since only one of these cards is Series 5, and I think personally you're better off saving your Spotlight opens until you really want 2 or 3 of the cards, or if it's a new card releasing in Series 5. So yeah, I'm going to be passing on the Spotlights this week, but I do plan to be picking up Ravonna just to do some fun experimentation with her powerful effect. So starting it out here, we have an On Reveal style deck. So On Reveal has quite a few cards that can make use of the Ravonna reduction. In this build, we're reducing things like Ironheart, Wolfsbane, Jubilee, and White Tiger. I think On Reveal has been kind of an underrated archetype. Cosmo is coming back a little bit, so you do have to be a little bit careful with your Wongs. But that is why we're running Echo here, to make sure that they can't try and surprise us with Cosmo in our Wong lane, as that is how we're going to be winning the game a lot of the time. A lot of people don't really respect the Wong, White Tiger, into Odin shenanigans, but it can still be really powerful and steal some games, especially so with the cost reduction of Ravonna, allowing us to potentially get out White Tiger alongside a good 3-drop like Ironheart or Wolfsbane on the final turn. Jubilee gives us a bit of an initial high roll, being able to Jubilee into Odin to reproc her effect, and in general is just a powerful effect that takes advantage of Ravonna's cost reduction. Zabu also gives us access to a little bit of bonus cost reduction since we have 4 4-drops here, and helps us just curve out a bit more effectively. And Iron Lad gets some pretty solid value here, copying our powerful On Reveals, Wong, or maybe even Ravonna. If you've missed playing On Reveal style decks like we all did back in Pool 1 and Pool 2, this is a cool way to make use of Ravonna for that style. Next up, we have some Mr. Negative shenanigans. So Ravonna can act as a bit of a backup in Mr. Negative decks, because a lot of the cards in negative decks have 0 or 1 power to begin with, since that makes for a very beneficial negative flip. And it's also just beneficial with Ravonna too, so she's kind of our backup plan here, allowing us to cheat out these powerful cards before the turns we're normally able to play them, or play multiple of them in the same turn. So Ravonna enables the curve out of Iron Man into copying it with Mystique on turn 5, enables some shenanigans with getting White Tiger and Ironheart down into the Wong lane, or maybe Mystiquing the Wong lane earlier on than we'd be otherwise able to. It's also good with our Zola and Null stuff. Obviously those cards will be better flipped, but still not bad getting a 1 cost reduction. The only cards that don't actually get benefit here from Ravonna are Zabu and Black Panther, but those cards are doing enough work on their own anyways, so we don't really have to worry about that. I've definitely been a fan of Black Panther in these negative style lists, as it gives you a bit of redundancy in terms of another way to potentially win the game without having to rely on Mr. Negative, or in this case, even Ravonna. If you want to go a little bit more all-in with your negative build though, you can opt for a Iron Lad inclusion instead of Black Panther. I think this will make your consistency a little bit worse, but negative has always been a high roll deck, so Lad just kind of gives you an additional way to high roll, and maybe gives you that extra chance at getting the negative effect off on turn 3 or turn 4 when you really need it. Other than that, the core is pretty much the same here, just good cards that work when they're flipped over with negative, and good cards that Ravonna just happens to give a good bonus to if we don't happen to find our Mr. Negative. And we can't also forget our negative deck of the past, Negative Surfer. This used to be an absolute menace. It isn't really the premier way for negative decks to go anymore, but some people do still enjoy it. And obviously we can make use of the cards we were already running in the other negative lists for Ravonna in Ironheart, Mystique, and Wolfsbane, which just happen to be good 3-drops here. We have Brood as just the staple in Surfer that also gets a little boost from the negative flip, and the more recently changed Magic, which helps give us an extra turn for more negative shenanigans, as long as the opponent doesn't turn it off with something like Legion or Snowguard. I do think the Surfer negative decks are kind of the weakest of the bunch, but people definitely have a soft spot for that archetype. If negative Surfer is something you enjoy and really miss playing, this is a neat new take on it. And the last Mr. Negative list we have here is another one that goes pretty hard with the on reveal effects, but we do have 2 different additions in this version. We have Jane Foster to draw all of our 0-cost cards post negative, so that includes Ironheart, Mystique, Iron Man, and Taskmaster. And Taskmaster is a pretty neat idea here, as if we're able to use our flipped Wolfsbane into a Wong lane, that can get really, really big, and then we can copy it for free with Taskmaster to act kind of as a Shuri at home for making really big stuff in 2 different lanes. Other than that, it performs similarly to the other negative decks featured. It's just pretty all in on the on reveal stuff. So if you like making some big stuff and getting a lot of on reveal effects going, and you appreciate that additional high roll of being able to go Mr. Negative into Jane into drawing all your good negative flips, this is probably the negative deck for you. Moving from one combo archetype to another, we have the Living Tribunal list. So Tribunal, kind of an all-in combo deck where we're trying to stack up a lane with our Iron Man and Onslaught and one other big thing, get the Tribunal out, spread the power across the lanes, win the game. Pretty straightforward stuff. I think it's gotten a little bit worse with the introduction of Alioth, as it can kind of counter what you're trying to do, but that's one of the reasons we're including Cosmo here, being able to stop opponents from being able to do that. Ravonna, nice little bonus include here, as there are quite a few cards that fit her requirement, namely Iron Man and Mystique, who are kind of the premier combo enablers of Ravonna, but also Jubilee for cheating out some of our bigger threats like Onslaught or the Tribunal itself. And it also gives a cost reduction to Forge, who we can maybe sneak in on an earlier turn now in order to boost up our Iron Man to get our power even bigger before we slam down the Tribunal. Then we have Darkhawk, a deck that has kind of seemed to disappear from the meta in the wake of Loki's release, and I really like how this one is built. This is Zabu-less Darkhawk. So I think this is one of the changes the developers were kind of pushing towards back when nerfing Rockslide and making it only a 3-cost card instead of a 4-cost card. It's actually pretty interesting because now we don't really need to run Zabu and we don't need to run a ton of 4-cost cards. We can get away with just running Darkhawk and Iron Lad, especially when we can get our Darkhawk reduced to 3 cost with Ravonna. This also enables us to run Iron Man as another good hit for Iron Lad, and something we can cheat out ahead of curve with Ravonna. And now that we have 2 powerful ongoing effects, it's a lot easier to sneak Mystique back into the deck to copy them. We have the classic 1-2 punch of Kitty Pryde Angela for pumping up power in one lane and kind of guaranteeing we're always going to have something to do during our early turns with, or just in the middle of the game when we have excess mana. Korgan Rockslide to disrupt our opponent and grow our Hawk. Ravonna for some cost reduction. Jeff for flexibility and that synergy with Angela, being able to go down in the Angela lane and move elsewhere afterwards. Legion to scam some games with weird locations. And America Chavez to help guarantee we get those early game cards in the first few turns when we really need them. Another deck where Ravonna might be useful is the Silver Surfer Patriot deck. So this one has fallen off a bit since the Absorbing Man nerf, but it did used to be very powerful, and I think it also has the advantage of being a deck that can be a little bit tricky for Loki decks to leverage, as they often fill up their board rather quickly, so they can't take advantage of a bunch of the cards that they might generate off of their Loki. Ravonna has nice synergy here, being able to reduce the cost of things like Patriot, Ironheart, Forge, Iron Man. Just pretty good overall. Also lets us justify the inclusion of Wolfsbane in a deck that we're often filling the board pretty effectively. Wolfsbane ends up being a pretty decent card, and especially so when we only have to pay 2 mana for her. We've got Iron Lad for a bit of additional high roll here in terms of being able to hit Brood and get some copies of it outside of just our normal Forge into Brood into Absorbing Man curve. And we have Legion for a bit of location interaction, and hopefully Patriot and Surfer to help close out the game on the final turn. Next up, we have Cerebro 3. So Cerebro 3 got a lot of popularity early on in the season as one of the potential ways to counter Loki, as giving Loki or Cerebro 3 cards usually wasn't very good for them. And I think this one definitely will see a boost from Ravonna, just being able to reduce the cost of our Cerebro and Mystique, so we have more time to play more of our other good 3-power cards. Seems very reasonable. We have some ways to interact with locations that might be unfavorable to us, such as Scarlet Witch and Rhino, Bass to boost up our power on our things that don't have 3 power, such as Cerebro, Mystique, or even our Luke Cage or Wasp here. Wasp also being good with our Valkyrie, who we can use to close down a lane towards the end of the game, and the recently buffed Shadow King, who can also be quite effective at stealing a lane towards the end of the game. Invisible Woman gives us a bit of protection for some of our powerful enablers here, like Cerebro and Mystique, or just allows us to hide a tech card until later in the game when it's relevant, like Shadow King or Valkyrie. Sentinel is an all-star in Cerebro 2, as he just gives us something to constantly be able to play for 3 power each turn after he comes down. And even though Bass does mess with the synergy of Ravonna, we're not going to have Ravonna every game, so just the ability to buff up our cards with less than 3 power while also being a body on board that we can potentially boost up with Valkyrie later is pretty valuable. You could also consider Iron Man in a deck like this, though Cerebro 3 has typically been cutting Iron Man due to the fact that it's one of the few cards that Loki can really benefit from stealing from you. Then we have a junk deck. This is another archetype people have been trying to bring back in the wake of all the Lokis on ladder, as Loki often fills up their board, and you can just kind of close out a lane by donating them something bad with Viper, sending a Goblin over their way. It honestly didn't even occur to me initially that Ravonna is going to be reducing the cost of things like Green Goblin and Hobgoblin, which definitely can be very useful. Being able to go Ravonna into Hobgoblin on 4 is quite a big way to swing a lane. We have the classic Viper Sentry combo with Hood as another way to donate another thing that the opponent might not really want while giving us a nice 6 power card. Debris acts as another way to clog up the opponent's lanes and is some nice anti-Galactus tech. Sentry gives us a bunch of power in one lane while also giving us a void that we can either donate away with Viper or destroy with our Carnage. Iron Man gives us a nice power boost in order to help close out a lane, and Alioth is especially good when the opponent has already lost a given lane, because then you really only have to focus on one lane in particular and use Alioth to close out the game on turn 6. And speaking of Galactus, we have a Galactus deck here with Ravonna, using Ravonna, much like in the other deck, to reduce the cost of the goblins, but also some of the other cards here that have synergy with things like our Destroyer, with Bucky Barnes, and Forge as another way to either boost up our Galactus power later on if we are worried the 7 power isn't going to cut it, or just boosting up something like our Wolverine or Nimrod that we want to destroy later on. In general, I think the regular ramp versions of Galactus are a little stronger right now, but if you're looking for a home for Ravonna in a Galactus-style shell, this is probably the way you want to go with it. And there we have it. That is going to wrap it up for our Day 1 Ravonna Renslayer Theory Crafts. Again, highly recommend checking out the article, link in the description below, from Safety Blade. He made some really cool decks here, and I'm very excited to see how these perform when she releases later tonight. That's going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and stay tuned here at Marvel Snap Zone for all your Marvel Snap content. I'm Zombies, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.